What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NBA Wednesday, January 25th. These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for today's NBA slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, let's take a look at this 10-game NBA slate tonight. At the point guard position, this guy's been on fire. He doesn't have a great matchup, but if you're trying to catch some of that fire, see if he can keep it going for one more game, I think he could be an interesting play here. Take a look at Kyrie Irving from the Brooklyn Nets playing the Philadelphia 76ers, who have a good defense overall, and they've been good versus opposing point guards. And Kyrie Irving has averaged 44.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 37 minutes per game with a 30% usage rate. He's projected at 45 fantasy points here tonight, but I think he can score 50 fantasy points or more here tonight. He's 10,100 DraftKings salary. So if he scores 50 or more fantasy points, that would be 5 times value or more. And he's 100 less on FanDuel. Kyrie Irving has scored 62, 84, and 62 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 39, 39, and 38 minutes. So he's playing monster minutes, monster production. He's got an absolutely enormous ceiling. Now, again, he has a bad matchup here tonight, so it's possible this is the game that he cools off. So just keep that in mind. I think he's worth a play here just to see if you can catch some of that fire. So I like Kyrie Irving here versus the Philadelphia 76ers. Okay, another point guard that I like, if you want to save some salary at this position, take a look at D'Angelo Russell from the Minnesota Timberwolves playing the New Orleans Pelicans, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing point guards. D'Angelo Russell has averaged 33.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 33 minutes per game with a 23% usage rate. Now, he's projected at 32.6 fantasy points here tonight, but I think he can score 35 fantasy points or more, get you 5 times value or more. He's 6,900 DraftKings salary, 100 less on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 231 points scored in this game, and D'Angelo Russell has scored 49, 39, and 42 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 42, 31, and 33 minutes, and he scored 40, 39, 29, and 28 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Pelicans. So I think he's got some 40 plus fantasy point upside here tonight. So I like D'Angelo Russell here versus the New Orleans Pelicans. Okay, let's take a look at the shooting guard position. I like DeJounte Murray from the Atlanta Hawks playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have the 8th worst defense overall, give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. DeJounte Murray has averaged 41 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 37 minutes per game with a 25% usage rate. He's projected at 43.1 fantasy points here tonight, and that's 5.3 times value. He's 8,200 DraftKings salary, 400 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 237 points scored in this game. DeJounte Murray has scored 35, 37, and 62 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 36, 37, and 36 minutes. He's got a good matchup here tonight, and I think he's got a good player versus team history as well. Yeah, DeJounte Murray has scored 44, 65, 41, 66, and 41 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Thunder. And if you go back just his last 5 games, after that 62, he scored 48 and 51. So DeJounte Murray just been on fire this season. Price hasn't quite caught up to his minutes and his production yet. That's why even if he scores his season average, it's going to be over 5 times value. So I like DeJounte Murray here versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. Another player that I like at the shooting guard position is Franz Wagner from the Orlando Magic.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And then we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Playing the Indiana Pacers, who have the 5th worst defense overall, give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. Franz Wagner also eligible at the small forward position. So he's averaging 32.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 33 minutes per game with a 25% usage rate. He's projected at 30.9 fantasy points here tonight, but I think he can score 35 fantasy points or more and get you 5 times value or more. Franz Wagner is $6,700 DraftKings salary, $200 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 233 points scored in this game, and Franz Wagner has scored 35, 27, and 53 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 33, 26, and 32 minutes. And I also like this pick because he's got a pretty good track record here versus the Pacers. Franz Wagner has scored 33, 43, and 43 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Pacers. So I like Franz Wagner here versus the Indiana Pacers. Okay, let's take a look at the small forward position. I like Gary Trent Jr. from the Toronto Raptors playing the Sacramento Kings, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing small forwards. Gary Trent Jr. has averaged 29 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 33 minutes per game with a 22% usage rate. Now, this is one of those guys, he always gets under-projected for some reason. There's just, throughout these analytical programs and stat projection models, there's just some players who end up getting under-projected more often than not, and that's Gary Trent Jr., so he's only projected at 26.7 fantasy points here tonight, but I think he can score 32 fantasy points or more and get you 5 times value or more. So if you don't agree with the projection, you just tap this little edit button right next to the projection, put your projection in there. So I'm going to put 32 fantasy points, click OK. Now, that will save. So next time you look at Gary Trent Jr. in any of the other tools, including the lineup optimizer, it will give you his new expected value. So at 32 fantasy points for $6,700 DraftKings salary, that's an expected value of 4.8. So not quite the 5 times value or more, but I do think he can score more than 32 fantasy points in this game, and he has 40 plus fantasy point upside. I think he's a low risk play as well because he's playing a lot of minutes. So Vegas thinks there's going to be 239 points scored in this game, and Gary Trent Jr. has scored 39, 43, and 27 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 35, 38, and 36 minutes. And let's take a look. Not very good history here versus the Kings, and that's probably partly why his projection was low. But he's playing well, and I think he always does seem to outperform his projection. So I like Gary Trent Jr. here versus the Sacramento Kings. Okay, let's take a look at the power forward position. So you got LeBron James in a good matchup here versus Giannis. I'm sorry, no, not versus Giannis, versus the Spurs. But he's on a back-to-back, and he's 11,700 DraftKings salary, coming off of a 77 fantasy point night last night. So I'm going to shy away from LeBron James just because of the back-to-back. Odds are he'll get limited minutes here tonight, and it'll be hard for him to hit value at 11,700. Then you got Giannis Antetokounmpo. He played 26 minutes last game, scored 51 fantasy points, but he hadn't played for a little while in the game before that, so I would wait to see how many minutes Giannis plays here. But let's take a look. You got Lauri Markkanen, who's in a bad matchup but's been playing well. Just looking at these studs, I'm not seeing a lot of studs that I like. I guess one of the first studs that might make sense would be Scotty Barnes, but he's 7,600. And we just went with Gary Trent Jr. at 6,700 from the Toronto Raptors. So I'm just kind of looking at this real time with you guys to give you a little extra content, to show you guys how I go through here and pick players. So you could look at a guy like John Collins from the Atlanta Hawks, and he's playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have the 8th worst defense overall, give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing power forwards. John Collins has averaged 28.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 31 minutes per game with a 17% usage rate. He's projected at 26.2 fantasy points here tonight, but I think he can score 30 fantasy points or more in this one, get you close to 5 times value or more, and he's 5,800 DraftKings salary, 200 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 237 points scored in this game. I do think this is a good game to stack, and John Collins has scored 26, 19, and 34 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 35, 33, and 35 minutes. So I like this pick because John Collins is averaging 0.94 fantasy points per minute. So if he's going to play 35 minutes, we could expect over 30 fantasy points here from John Collins. So I like John Collins here versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now I also like Draymond Green from the Golden State Warriors playing the Memphis Grizzlies, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, but they give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing power forwards. Draymond Green has averaged 29.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 32 minutes per game with a 12% usage rate. He's projected at 28.8 fantasy points here tonight. I think he can score 32 fantasy points or more, get you 5 times value or more. He's 6,300 DraftKings salary, 500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 239.5 points scored in this game, and Draymond Green has scored 35 and 44 fantasy points in his last 2 games, playing 32 and 37 minutes.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
But I like this pick because Draymond Green has scored 46 and 46 fantasy points in his last 2 games versus the Grizzlies. It's a good matchup. I think that he can hit value fairly easily here tonight, and he's got 40 plus fantasy point upside. So I like Draymond Green here versus the Memphis Grizzlies. Okay, moving on to the center position. Okay, so studs on the slate, Nikola Jokic, but he's in a back-to-back, so I'll shy away from that. You got Giannis Antetokounmpo, and we had already said he played 26 minutes last game, scored 51 fantasy points. How many minutes will he play here tonight? That's a small risk factor, but against Jokic on a back-to-back could be interesting. I'd probably shy away from that matchup, especially because we don't know how many minutes Giannis is going to play. I think there's other players we could play here. So Joel Embiid would be a good spot, but he's questionable. Again, a little more risk, and he doesn't have a good matchup. Domantas Sabonis. Here's a stud that we could look at here, but he's not in a good matchup, so we're going to pass. Pascal Siakam. He's not in a good matchup, and he's been playing really well as of late, but he's almost 10,000 DraftKings salary, so going to need 47 fantasy points or more, something like that, to get you 5 times value or more, which he's done in 2 out of his last 3 games, but again, not a great matchup here. So I would just move down in salary, and I think this projection is lagging here. I'm just going to put in my projection for this, and we'll actually just reload the center page. I want to see what the expected value is with that new projection. Okay, so I was looking at this Alperen Sengun. I gotta check to see how that name is pronounced. Alperen Sengun from the Houston Rockets playing the Washington Wizards. So I have him in as, I originally had him in as projected at 40 fantasy points, which was being somewhat conservative. And that was under 5 times value. So at 45 fantasy points, that's 5.2 times value. Now, he scored 38, 58, and 54 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 34, 37, and 39 minutes. So he is on an absolute roll. He scored 70 and 36 fantasy points in the 2 games before that. So his last 5 games have been phenomenal. His salary has caught up a little bit here. It depends on how he continues to perform. He could be over 9K soon. But I do think you're buying high here at Alperen Sengun. A fine play, though, in a good matchup. But the guy that I liked a little bit more, if you want to save a bunch of salary on this center position, take a look at Wendell Carter Jr. from the Orlando Magic playing the Indiana Pacers, who have the 5th worst defense overall, give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing centers. Wendell Carter Jr. has averaged 32.5 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 30 minutes per game with a 21% usage rate. He's projected at 34 fantasy points here tonight. That's just a 1.5 over his season average, and that's 5.3 times value. He's 6,400 DraftKings salary, 300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 233 points scored in this game. Wendell Carter Jr. has scored 40, 29, and 16 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 32, 31, and 24 minutes. So Wendell Carter Jr. has been playing well this season. Every once in a while, he has a dud game. He has a flop where he'll just score, 15, 18 fantasy points. So that will kill your lineup, but for the most part, he's been pretty consistent throughout the season, and he's got a great matchup. I only say that because last time I picked him, I remember it was that 1 game out of like 8 that I picked him for, and he didn't do well. But outside of that 1 game, for the most part, you're going to get a good game from Wendell Carter Jr. here and a good matchup. So I think he makes a ton of sense here. So I like Wendell Carter Jr. here versus the Indiana Pacers. Now I'm just pushing it for content here, so I'm going to give you another play here at the center position. If you want to save even more salary, take a look at Clint Capella from the Atlanta Falcons playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have the 10th worst defense overall, give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing centers. Clint Capella has averaged 31.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 27 minutes per game with a 16% usage rate. He's projected at 28.7 fantasy points here tonight. and that is 5 times value. He's 5,700 DraftKings salary, 800 more on FanDuel. So if you compare him to John Collins, also from the Atlanta Hawks here, John Collins is 5,800 DraftKings salary, only 200 more on FanDuel. So it looks like John Collins could be the good FanDuel play, whereas Clint Capella looks underpriced on DraftKings. And we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 237 points scored in this game. And Clint Capella has scored 41, 29, and 20 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 36, 23, and 19 minutes. So I think Clint Capella is an interesting play here on DraftKings because he played 36 minutes last game, put up a monster stat line of 41 fantasy points at 5,700 DraftKings salary. That would be, he would smash value. So I like Clint Capella as a high-risk, high-reward tournament play here versus the Oklahoma City Thunder.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.